So Tim Kirk from Clonakilla in New South Wales in Canberra district, also making wines in the hilltops, and obviously cool climate Shiraz specialist. So Tim, tell me about the 2011 vintage.
So there's no point pretending that it was not a challenging vintage. It was challenging. We had rain, a lot of rain, quite serious floods up Queensland, which of course is a long way north of us, but a lot of those systems we still had some effect from. So we had rain, and we had cooler conditions than certainly we've had in the previous 3 years. And I think probably what we could say is that really from 2001 on to 2010, Australia's been in the grip of a fairly serious drought. And in the middle of a drought, you know, you can sometimes think, well, this winemaking is easy. I mean, there's no disease pressure. You have this long, warm autumn, great warm summer, you know, without too much rain, and there's no disease pressure. It's easier to make wine in those conditions. Now, of course, in Europe, they don't have the sort of strength or depth of drought that we have in Australia, so they're much more adept, if you like, at making wine in wetter and cooler conditions. And in a way that's normal. So moving back to seasons both in 2010 and 2011 where we had rain to contend with and cool periods as well as warm periods, it was a return to normality. And I think as to use the cliche, anyone can make good wine in a good year. But you know, really, if you back yourself as a winemaker, making a wine in a cooler or wetter season, making really good wine in that context is what makes or breaks you, as I think, as a serious winemaker.
Yeah, because we talked at Landmark about, you know, making, you know, perhaps the best wines are coming from when you're on that cusp of ripeness and you're on the right side of the cusp.
Yeah, that's right.
And you have that edge of tannin and acidity which brings so much life to the wine.
Well, and personality, and I think that's the thing about the Clonakilla. We're working with cooler climates, particularly in our Canberra district vineyards, that you know, you do see the personality of the vintage so much more. And I think for everyone who loves great wine, it's the personality of what you see in the glass. I mean, you can smell something, so that smells like Shiraz. Well, it certainly does, but I think great cool climate viticulture is capturing the personality of the site, which is so much more than just simple flavours like, say, spice or red fruit. It's the personality of the site that's how I see it. That's my philosophy, that I'm trying to give voice to something that's noble and dignified and beautiful, in fact, in that site that we have there in Canberra, which we know has been proved over many, many years to be a magic site for Shiraz. And I think in years like 2009, which is a textbook vintage, where you have this potency, this glorious depth of fruit, just this extraordinary lift of aroma off the surface of the wine, and then these beautiful rounded textures, and you see a, you know, it's a wonderful thing. The 2009 Shiraz Viognier, the 2010 or the 2011 hasn't got the same power, hasn't got the same kind of, you know, just glorious soaring fruit, but it's got something which is just as attractive in a wine. It's got this more layered, complex, subtle, spicy, savoury expression of Shiraz, which you can only really get in a cooler vintage. And you know, upstairs at the tasting that we're doing here with Liberty Wines, we're trying the 02 Shiraz Viognier, which is in those drought years of 01 through to 09 was the coolest of the vintages. And it's just opening beautifully. You know, you get this beautiful sort of damp earth character coming through. Great vintages produce great wines, you know, in different vintage conditions, there's no doubt about it. We celebrate the glorious vintages like 2009, but I think in 2010, 2011 we will also find something which is piercing and beautiful, but in a more subtle, more kind of quiet mode, but still utterly delicious.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to like about the light and shade of a vintage.
Light and shade,
think, you know, if you're a wine lover, that's an exciting dimension of wine. That's part of what brings you back each year to see what's happened and to get a sense of a vintage.
Exactly.
And varietally, strengths in 2011?
Well, I think it was, you know, as you know, we've been. It was a great year to try a few different things. So we have made a little bit of Pinot Noir, and you know, I would love. I think this is true of most winemakers, perhaps most wine lovers. You know, there is a special place in the heart of any wine lover for Burgundy and for the Burgundy grape varieties. So we've had a bit of a play with a small patch of Pinot Noir from our vineyard there. and that's sort of, I'm quietly excited about that.
Okay.
We'll see, it's early days.
Watch this space.
Watch this space. I'm not making any promises. We'll just see how it turns out. But,
Okay.
and we also made some Grenache. I'm only talking about a couple of barrels here. A little bit of Mourvèdre, which is looking really interesting.
Yeah. And that's off your younger vineyard.
Yeah, it's off a young vineyard.
Yeah, but your own estate.
Yeah, own estate. So that's looking exciting. A spicier, more savoury expression of Grenache, which is interesting me a great deal. And funnily enough, for a cooler and wetter vintage, the Cabernet varieties have done quite well. So Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc and Merlot, the thicker skins, I think, protected them from the downpours that we had to contend with. And they ripened up beautifully later in the season. And we did get that in 2011. We had it extended. We had rain, but then we had quite a nice break of clear weather, if not warm weather, clear weather towards the end, which just seems to have finessed, if you like.
Yes.
So certainly the Cabernet and some of the best blocks of Shiraz.
Yeah.
Again, it's a watch this space. I've got a few different batches of Shiraz Viognier out of 2011, which just smell beautiful, just beautiful. But you have to love the savoury, spicy, floral dimension of Shiraz. These are not big wines. They are elegant wines with a capital E.
Yep.
But if you like that style of Shiraz, I think you're going to find something in 2011 which will be quite thrilling.
Okay, I'm looking forward.
Good.
So coming to the bigger picture, Tim, and 2011, there was a lot of doom and gloom around the eastern states, around the high rainfall and disease pressure, a lot of high crop losses, and yet the vintage turns out at 1.6 million tonnes, so 1% up on 2010, certainly from the preliminary reports. So what's your feeling on where Australia needs to go in terms of sustainability? Because I know that's been questioned over a number of years, and Stephen Strachan talking about that in relation to the 2011 vintage, and saying this sort of tonnage just isn't sustainable for Australia.
Yeah, I don't know if I can say a lot about that, because in a way the volume end of the business is not something I have a lot to do with. What I do want to say is that really, to take wine in Australia forward, we have to do, and that sort of includes the winemakers like myself, we have to do what we're doing here today at this Liberty tasting. So Liberty has a fantastic collection of really excellent Australian small wineries, which they're putting on show here today, leading with our best foot. I think what we're about now in Australia, and this is a sign of our growing up as an industry, it's about A, finding great sites, and B, celebrating great sites. Now, this is not rocket science, it's not a new idea. Of course, the French have been doing this for centuries. They have found the great sites and they celebrate the great sites. So I've just, for example, just come back from Burgundy, and where you of course had that stratification of Grand Cru, Premier Cru, Village and the communal wine. I think that's what we're about. I have no doubt that the great sites in Australia, and we've got to remember Australia is an ancient continent with the most remarkable landscapes. There is absolutely no reason, utterly no reason at all, why the great landscapes in Australia shouldn't, in the hands of viticulturists and winemakers who care, really care, produce wines which are absolutely the equal of the great wines coming out of the wonderful great regions of Europe. You know, there's nothing intrinsically about Europe which makes the wines greater. We are now in the process of finding great Australian terroir, to use the French word. We're a much younger winemaking nation, so we're earlier on in the process, but we are knocking at the door. We're finding the great sites, we're celebrating the great sites, and we're sharing them here. And of course, here we are in London today. And it's really exciting to see the reaction of people who are tasting the wines, and I just believe so much that we have something noble and wonderful to offer the world of wine. And you know, when it comes to Australian wine, yes, in terms of the volume end of the market, there are problems. We have too much bulk wine, if you like, but you know, you can never have too much great wine. And you know, that's the business that I'm in, is making and celebrating and sharing great wine. And certainly, you know, this doesn't sound vain, but as far as Clonakilla is concerned, we just in no way can keep up with demand. And
coming back to site, I mean, I know that you prefer to talk about Murray Bateman rather than Canberra District, for example. So coming back to site, I mean, do you see it as an advantage for Australia to, you know, recognise officially sub-regions? Because I know there's a debate about that, that the
Yeah.
freedom of not having the same appellation system as France is a big
Yes.
advantage for Australia.
Yes.
And it seems to me that Australia is at this sort of point where do we want to go with it? What do we call it? Do we call it terroir?
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
should we have sub-regions?
Yeah.
What's your take on that, Tim?
Oh, look, it's a very interesting debate. I think this tends to fall out fairly naturally anyway. I mean, if you're really into wine, I mean, yes, say take a region like Coonawarra, for example, which produces some just magnificent Cabernet in particular and some very fine Shiraz. You know, if you're really into wine, you listen and you pay attention to where are the vineyard areas, where are the wineries, where the really great Coonawarra Cabernets are coming from. You know, or the same would be true of the Barossa or the Margaret River, for example. You know, there's a stretch of land up there on Caves Road in Margaret River in Western Australia where you've got some extraordinary names. So Cullen, Mosswood would be the two of them. You know, who just year after year seem to have something about their wine.
Yeah, the Willie Abbott factor.
Exactly.
For Cabernet.
Right. So that's that little stretch of land there, or that particular red soil cigar in Coonawarra. There's something about that landscape which just has some magic to it. So I think this stuff does happen organically and naturally, that we look for those things, we listen and we search and we try and discover the great sites. Now whether we need to put names around them or legal boundaries around them or definitions around them is a more difficult question, because I think in the Australian industry we've always valued our freedom to experiment, to do different things, to try different things, not to feel kind of tied down to using only one grape variety or only one set of grape varieties in one vineyard area. I don't think we'd want to go down that path, but on the other hand we do have to do what I was referring to before, which is to find and celebrate great sites. Yeah. So that's the process that we have to further and continue and keep working at.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Tim.
My pleasure. Thank you, Sarah.